This picture that you see here.
Sorry, I just
No,
started
it's all
recording.
good. This picture that you see now is called a population pyramid, and this is one just of Canada. I just took one, whatever one. And a population pyramid is called a pyramid because what we do is we stand it on its feet, and at the top, at the head, are the eldest people in your community, and at the bottom, at the feet, are the youngest people in your community. And then you can kind of see what the quantities are of different ages. Break it into little 5-year increments, and you can see if there's less or more or less or more. And Canada is a little curvy, right? You can see. And each of those curves represents something that might be useful to your business, because these could be your consumers, they could be your employees. If you're in the community, they could be your ratepayers, right? They could be students, who knows? And everybody, you know, the thing that's really lovely about population statistics is you have kind of a 9-month jump on all of it. Whether we're talking immigration or domestic fertility, you kind of know what's coming before it happens, most of the time. And so when you look at this, you know it's not the kind of problem you can solve in a week. It takes you a little minute to get organized. So I want to introduce you to the Canada as I see her, and then I'm going to show you a few of your local communities. So you see the Canada at the top. Of course, it narrows at the top. There are fewer of us as we get over 100, and that makes kind of sense. And then it broadens out to this kind of a wide shoulder. That's the baby boom. The widest part of that there that you see, that's the baby boomers. And so they're born between, let's say, 1947 and 1966-ish. Anybody here want to be a boomer? You have choice. Cool. How many kids in your sibling set? You're one of 8. Okay. So pretty typical. Almost made a ball team, right? Like almost. Definitely got a hockey team, right? This is kind of a normal boomer family, really. My dad is a baby boomer. He's a very early end baby boomer. He's one of 10. There were lots of families in his community that were 10s. 8s was pretty normal. The number we're looking for is 4.0. And that's kind of the fun thing to keep track of. A baby boomer is defined by their fertility. And that's that they come from sibling sets on average of 4. So for every 8 you've got, there's a couple of like 2s and 3s and whatever else, and all balances out across Canada to 4. So you get 2 parents create 4 babies, you're increasing your population. Right, that's more than replacement rate. And that's when you create that wide base that you see at the top of the population pyramid. Now, the thing that it does that's really weird is it narrows, has a little bit of a waist, right? So from 1967 to 1979, who's born there? And you? How many kids in your sibling set? 5. One of 5? One of 2? And one of
I'm
2.
80, but I'm an only
You
child.
And you're an only child?
Yeah.
So you average us out, we're perfect. And so what you saw is that we went from a fertility rate of 4.0 in your group to a fertility rate of just under 2 in your group. Now, what narrows a fertility rate like that? One small pink thing that does it.
Pick me.
So it's birth control pill. 1961, the birth control pill was approved for distribution in the US, and by 1967, they cut the fertility rate in half. You cannot overstate the consequence of that. And at the time, I don't think anybody possibly understood what was going to happen. You see what it did to our labor supply. Is it started to narrow it at its base, right? Started to narrow it. I'm going to talk to you about why that's a real problem in a minute. Now, you see there's a widening again, more towards kind of the hip area. That's going to be the children of the baby boomer. So if they've got boom, and it shrinks, that's the baby bust. Then it expands again, that's called the echo. That's the echo of the baby boom. Does that make sense? Like, of course it does. Those children, when you get that many women hitting fertile age at the same time, they create their own baby boom. But it's not because they had a whole bunch of babies, it's because so many women were making babies. So if you are born, let's say 1980 to 1995, that makes you an echo. Put your hands up. 80, 95, how many kids in your sibling set?
There's 3 of us.
3? Okay, cool. Anybody else?
1980 to what, sorry?
To 95. You're out. You're up. You're with us.
I'm in 73.
Yeah, you're mine. You're all mine. So here's what's kind of fun. That baby echo group The fertility rate didn't go up. In fact, it's continued to decline. It sits probably at a 1.5 rate. So you get lots of onesies, twosies families. But they created a population swell of their own, which meant that there was kind of plentiful labor during their, as they moved through the labor market, there's lots of them. Problem though, right after them, my generation, notorious underperformers, we underperformed on this front as well. And so you start to see that population pyramid narrow again at the base. And those are the babies that my generation are just not having in great numbers. So if you're a buster, so you're a buster, how many kids do you have?
In my family, there's 6.
Did you have 6 kids?
I did not have 6 kids. I had 0.
You had 0. I had 0. Who else is a buster? How many did you have? We know
I
one.
have 2.
2?
Yeah.
Other busters? How many did you have?
Well, at 0, I adopted 3.
Okay, yeah. And we do have some,
Weird things going
we
on.
have different answers to that question. Yeah, you have to thank you for showing up. Because you're creating a tax base that the rest of us are neglecting dramatically. So let's just take this little sample set of 5 women. We have only 3 biological children in that group of 5, and then we have adopted children in that group of 5, right? Now that doesn't, that fertility is counted by the biological mother, right? So this is a very interesting thing. And this is our generation. We are that first generation of women after the birth control pill was broadly disseminated that had choice. And that culturally, I think my mom, of course, had access to the birth control pill, but culturally was really dissuaded from smaller families, right? They were really encouraged, like, you got married, you started your babies. My generation, the question was starting to emerge, like, you get married, or do you? You have babies, or not? This was the place where we were a bit of a question mark. Here's what's weird about us, though. For the first time, probably in recorded history, by the way, in recorded history, base is much narrower than the shoulders. Now, the problem with this, and it is a problem, is that the entire way that we design companies and communities wants it to be the widest at its bottom. So you can imagine if I just drew a line at the baby boomers and just blocked out the rest of it, that's how the population is supposed to look to meet the economy that we've created. That makes sense? We've always relied on having more young labor coming into the workforce than there are retiring out of it. And with more young labor, what happens to wage rates? They stay low. You got competition for every job, right? You line up of kids holding their hats in their hands, looking every time there's a job opening. Employers love that. Plus, communities have an optimistic lens on the future because they're like, look at this population coming into productive capacity. We can make some good bets on the future. When your population narrows at the base, all bets are off. I mean, that's not a very optimistic way to end that little bit, but it is an important thing to talk about. I recognize that we've got representatives of both the business community and the municipality here. This is a game changer in the way that we think about communities and the future. And so what happens in a world where you need more seniors facilities than you need playgrounds? And when you think about it, when you think about your productive generation, so, our generation, we have this thing called the dependency burden. How many people who are retired out of the workforce and how many people were waiting to come into the workforce? We take those 2 quantities and we level it against the number of people in the workforce. And you want more people in the workforce than in either side. And that's not going to be the case. Our dependency burden is going to shift where we have more people retired than we maybe have in the workforce. How do we navigate that as employers? How do we navigate that as communities, as educators, and as households? So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. Do you want me to stop right here and now?
Yeah, sure.
And then we'll have our lunch. Now that I've left you with that super optimistic message. Still want to keep going. I'll be here in 15 minutes.
Recording.
Okay. So I left off with a pretty optimistic perspective on the labor supply in Canada. And now I just want to translate that a little bit more locally. So this is a population pyramid of Alberta. What do you notice right off the bat that makes it a bit different than the broader Canada pyramid?
Bottom of it.
Yeah, she's wider in the bottom. So this is a much younger population. Alberta has one of the youngest populations of all of the provinces across Canada, like if you're in Ontario or Quebec, you'll see that it's much, much older. And so that's an advantage for us, it really is, but you can imagine, even with that advantage, it's still very difficult to find entry-level labor in most sectors, in most parts of Alberta right now. So despite this advantage of having a young population, we still do have a bit of a dilemma, right? Because we're still seeing that narrowing in at the bottom. Now, either side here represents two genders. I'm going to actually take away that distinction. It's not very useful to us. And it shows us kind of the distinctions between different age groups a little bit more clearly if I lay the population pyramid down on our side. And so you can imagine that's the top now, 100-year-olds. And this side over here are the younger people. Now I've pulled up Whitecourt for a reason, and I'll show you why, because Mayerthorpe looks a little wacky. Now, when you look at Whitecourt, no, present company excluded, of course. When you take a look at Whitecourt, you can clearly see the baby boom, and then there's a little saddle point. That's the bust, and then the echo, that big wide part of the curve, and then it drops down again. Those children of the busters are called Generation Z or Generation Z, and that's a much smaller generation. You get a little, kind of a little bump there, which is the beginning of those babies that the millennials have had. This is a very turbulent curve. I want to just be clear about that. Those peaks and valleys make it very difficult for you to figure out your labor supply, your consumer supply, your student supply, whatever else. It is, and those curves don't go away. You can imagine, you can already see a big population will create another big population, a small population will create another small population. How do you bridge those gaps? There's really kind of two solutions. One is immigration, of course. Now, we do have immigration in Alberta. One of the reasons we're one of the youngest provinces is because we poach from the other provinces. That's not domestic, that's not our own fertility. But if you were on the East Coast during the oil boom in 2000 whatever, chances are there was an Albertan company there recruiting you and offering to pick you up and your whole family and relocate you to Alberta. And this is not that people came knocking on the door in Alberta. Organizations were actively out there recruiting. And so we know who's prime for a recruitment move like that, and they're generally in the 35-year age range. And so when you see 5 years on either side of that, that makes sense to me. We also take a look at the age of the average international migrant, and their chances are going to be in that same range. They've gotten their post-secondary education, they have some workload, like some work experience under their belt. That's what they need to become an applicant that is likely to be successful. And so we tend to see that all migrants, whether they're coming into provincially or internationally, probably coming in that 35 plus or minus range. So when you start to see that kind of spike at the 35 mark, that makes sense to me, right? It doesn't mean that that's domestic fertility though. That's not domestic labor. Okay, now I'm going to show you Mayerthorpe. Just brace yourselves. Oh my God. Now Mayerthorpe looks like it's in the middle of cardiac arrest right now. And I want to tell you why. That's not because it is. It's because at a certain point, what's the total population of Mayerthorpe? I can't remember for the life of me. About 1,500? 1343. 1343. Okay. So at about the 2,400 mark, you have a big enough sample set that your curve smooths out. But kind of in the, under 2,000 mark, if you get a high performance family, like one Duggars, things get a little bit bonkers because you can create peaks and valleys when just one family has high fertility. So for example, if you take a look at your baby boomers, they're the 60 to 64s there's only 80 of them in your whole community in that age range of 60 to 64. So one big family could spike that up. And it would look like you had this remarkable supply of 60 to 64-year-olds, and you don't. You really don't. So when the numbers are a little bit under that 2,000, 2,400 mark, I tend to not graph them because it just looks bonkers. And it's not that you're bonkers, and you're not in cardiac arrest, but it just starts to be swayed too easily by one thing or another and doesn't tell your story super accurately. Does that make sense? But that is you. That is our Mayerthorpe. So let's take a look at a couple of other communities in your neighboring areas, just to give some comparison. Here's Fox Creek, and I showed you Whitecourt already. You can see Fox Creek. Fox Creek looks different than Whitecourt, and it's kind of interesting this way. Big bunch of baby boomers up there, you know that, it's a little bit of an older population, why is that? What do you think Fox Creek looks like this?
Because of the boom in the seventies when
You
the
got it.
western population. came.
Yeah. You get an oil project that rolls through at a particular time and creates stable employment. People stay with it, right? And in fact, I'm gonna say it's about a dozen years ago, I was working with Fox Creek when they were talking about how to do better partnerships with the private sector projects that were coming through to create sustainability for their community. Because when you get a project that stays, then you have the chance of keeping families there. And then you'll get fertility, which you can see in that 10 to 14 bump, right? When you get a project that is like a construction project, so let's say they have 1,200 people move in on a construction project, but they're only gonna keep 200 to work there. That becomes a problem, because where do they get the 1,200? Yeah. And so they're not stable to your economy. Yes, they give it a good boost, right? And they punch it in a fun way. But like I've lived up in St. Paul and I sure worked out in St. Paul quite a bit. And Lloydminster, some of these towns that have big projects come through fairly frequently. And like all of a sudden Walmart's shelves are emptied. And then all of a sudden nobody's buying that stock,
Yeah, the TMX is doing that too.
right?
I see right now.
Yeah, right.
They're listing their little towns to like 5,500 people.
Right, and so then you create infrastructure in that town. And so the one in St. Paul that I seem to remember, I might have the brand name wrong here, but I think you'll understand what I mean. Like they had a Mr. Loop set up, right? Because they had to keep all the CVIPs and all of the industrial vehicles properly maintained. So they opened up a loop shop for this. And once that contract moved on. Now it's dog wash. Or whatever it is now, right? Now it has to be reassigned. Those assets have to be reassigned. So there's a real benefit in knowing whether or not this is going to create stability for your community. Because then you know you can lean into it and create infrastructure around it to support it. When it's kind of coming in, giving it a punch and moving on, then you can decide as a community and as an employer, how do you play in that game? Because as a local employer, you can't compete with those wages. And that's tough, right? That's really tough as they come in and they're throwing some fairly significant money around. And how do you then step into that labor market to be successful? Okay, let's take a look at Fairview and Valley View. Pulled some of these ones from North. They've got a very, I pulled them because they have kind of a typical pattern. And the typical pattern here, as you can imagine, it drops off really aggressively in those elder years for sure. And there's a nice good spike at that 60 to 64 range, but you see like it just plummets after 64. Why is that? When they're older than 64, okay?
Do they not have any seniors homes?
It might not
Seniors.
even just be the seniors' homes.
Just the seniors leaving the community?
It's some of the specialized healthcare supports, right? If in a smaller community, they don't have some of the specialized healthcare supports, and we start to see people urbanizing a little bit, getting closer to those urban centers that offer them some of the particular needs that they have. Plus, where do their kids live? Right, and we do see seniors start to, so we start to see these rural communities particularly lose that vibrant, rich kind of just retiring or post-retirement age people. That's your volunteer base, isn't it?
Mhm.
Those are the people that vitalize your community in ways that are really, really cool. They got a wealth of experience and exposure, and they know some stuff and they know some people. And it's worrisome to me that they don't always stay in communities. All right, and then you see it decline fairly predictably and it bumps up fairly predictably and then drops again. This is a thing to pay attention to. When you get a chance to kind of assess your own organization, it's really cool to do your own age gaps and see where things live. I'm going to bring two more samples forward for you. This one should be Edmonton and Calgary. Now, Edmonton and Calgary, wowza, that bulge at that 35 to 39, right? That just, whoo, that goes up. Those are your kids that went to university and never came back. Right, and I do want to talk about this. I'm going to have Red Deer and Lethbridge come up next, but college and university towns have a catchment area that reaches to the entire province, right? And what we know is that our younger generations are increasingly well educated, And they don't generally stay in their rural communities to get that education. They typically move. They don't have to so much anymore with more online education becoming available, but typically the experience is a bit richer, right? They want to play sports. They want to live in the dorms. They want to complain about their dorm mates. They want that experience, and we want that for them. So we ship them off. And I used to teach at the U of A at Camrose. So we had a rural campus in Camrose called Augustana, which was awesome because it was where lots of rural kids kind of would feel quite comfortable attending the big institution, but with a small town vibe. Loved it there. But you know what's interesting is you'd watch this kid coming from, like, let's say Stettler or whatever, which is reasonably close, but they'd partner up while they were there. Right, and now they're considering these two careers. And maybe Stettler isn't the place to get back to anymore. So we know that of all of the kids that we send out to university, we don't get them all back to those communities. Edmonton and Calgary keep a bunch. And they're out there actively recruiting for your kids, because, and I'm not saying they shouldn't, I think this is all very good. It's just about knowing it as an employer in your organization, you know, in your community, trying to figure out how to be successful staffing. Where do all of your 20-24-year-olds go? They're currently in institutions like the U of A and the U of C. And when they're done, you don't get 100% of them back. There's a net drain on your community, and you can see where they go. And that's where they end up having their babies. And that's annoying because you want those babies too, damn it. And then finally, I'll show you Red Deer and Lethbridge. So two mid-sized larger communities, and the same thing. Look at the big swell there in that young adulthood space. They end up anchoring in these other spots and starting their families there. And I do worry about what that means, how planful we can be as a community to make sure that we're stable in the presence of these realities. The last graph that I want to show you, and it's an important one, and maybe the most important one, and forget everything else, that'd be fine, just remember this. This is a graph that shows you the life expectancy of a company that's on the S&P 500 index. So the S&P 500 is an index of companies, and it's just like almost like a random basket. It gives us a bit of a vibe for how the economy is performing. Okay, and we measure all the things about these companies and report it back. So it's just a good sample set. So back in the 1960s in the S&P 500, the average life expectancy of a company was 60 years. So in the 1960s, you're entering into the world of work, you could expect the company that you were joining on average to have a life expectancy of 60 years. So if you joined that company right out of school, you had a really pretty good expectation of retiring from there. And typically these companies that offer time-based incentives, like you stick around long enough, you'll get. You stick around, we'll give you a bonus or a belt buckle or a promotion, you'll move up the ladder. But it became very time-based, right? So right now you pull your jets, you put in your time, pay your dues, sweep some floors until it's your turn. And this is like this dangling carrot, right? Whole organizational structures were built on these dangling carrots that said, you just plod away where you're at, and maybe one day you too move up the ladder. So this was the 1960s, and it was a real interesting vibe, right? Because the employees then went into this valuing security, longevity, stick-to-itiveness, right? It would be a proud thing to say I was 35 years with one company. And it was a proud thing for that company to say, this employee worked with us for 35 years. We celebrated tenure. Now, that's all fine and good, except things have changed if you move over kind of to the other side of the graph, and those red lines that you see that start to project into the future. By the year 2030, which is shockingly soon, we expect that the life expectancy of one of those same organizations is 12 years. Right? Like, does that just like kind of quiet you down for a moment? So at a 12-year model, I don't walk into that labor market saying loyalty, dedication, and hard work will get me there over time. And I'm not interested in any delayed gratification. I am looking at you as an organization saying, if you're not investing me, moving me around and getting the skills and the experiences that I need to be competitive, I need to move on. If you're not losing it, you're losing, if you're not using it, you're losing it. The reason being is that I know the deal here. If I'm, let's say, 35-year-old, kind of starting to figure stuff out, pretty awesome at what I do, and I go to work for you and you let me languish, Just let me get Dusty on a shelf for 5 years, I'm unemployable. And I know it. So I'm looking at you going, walk in with a plan. And in 6 months, I'm looking at you saying, are we on that plan? Are we doing something with me? Now, here's the thing. Labor knows this faster than employers do. So the employer on the other side of that is going, what in the hell is going on with employees this week? Because I've had everybody in my office asking for a promotion and a special project and training and a raise. Like they all deserve everything. And they just all started six weeks ago. Right? Like employers are having an interesting experience with this because they're still kind of built on that 1960s pyramid model, except they have a 2030s narrow at the base model to deal with. And that's a problem, right? Those are different expectations and we're not finding each other in the middle. So there's a real shift in mindset here. Now, I want to talk about each of these different generations and in their mindset about work. Before I get into that, I have to say, not a thing different from one age to the next. People are exactly the same humans. You know this. You are humans yourselves, and you're hanging out with other humans. You know everybody's kind of the same. We all have the same values. We all want the same things for our kids. It's not that one generation is actually different genetically than another. However, they do have different labor markets, which create different expectations and different needs. So if a baby boomer is shaped by that 1960s mindset, and today's millennials are shaped by this 2030s mindset, they will ask for different things in the marketplace, and you need to figure that out so that you can keep both engaged in a way that works best, both for your company and for them. So I want to talk about some of the characteristics of each based on the conditions that they experienced. Not who they are as people, but the conditions that were around them that shaped them. Okay, does that make sense? I don't think that millennials are bad, it's just all I have to say. Founding, but not bad. So let's talk about baby boomers, and I know some of you have met a boomer or two in your life, because they were the largest population in Canada for decades and decades and decades until very, very recently. And so they really dominated the news, the marketplace, consumer space, employer space, all of the spaces. Their stamp is on everything that we touch right now. So let's talk about the conditions that they experienced growing up. The average baby boomer, so average, I pick one in a room, everybody else is on either side. If I pick that one person in a room, they have a family, they have a sibling set of 4. They have both parents typically still married. Typically dad's the primary breadwinner. Typically mom's more engaged with home-based activity. Like this is a kid who generally will come home from school to a mom that's at home. Typically better connected to their rural roots and their family farming roots than subsequent generations. Typically living in about a 1,200 square foot house with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 1 car, 1 TV. Typically not allowed in that house very often at all, right? Generally coming home off the school bus, folks change your clothes, get the hell out, and nobody cares where they go. There is no supervision, right? There are no play dates. And they don't have very much stuff because typically they're growing up on a single income with 6 mouths to feed. So they're not like, they don't have a very materialistic childhood. They don't have all the toys they want. They hear the word no an awful lot. They didn't get European vacations. They didn't get their own car at 16. They didn't get, full stop. They shared a room. They didn't get their own pants. They had hand-me-downs. Right, and they did have to really carefully distribute their wealth and their resources. They had good clothes, and they had school clothes, and they had play clothes, right? Like everything kind of got used. They weren't really allowed to decide what channel was on the television. They didn't ever say, I'm not eating that. They had a different kind of experience growing up as children.
This is the boomers you're talking
Yeah.
about? You're describing my job. That was me.
Right? Now, so let's be clear, like when I say the boomers go from 1947 to 1966.
Oh, I'm 67.
Yes, because the conditions didn't change on a day, changed over a decade. So if you're in there and you're feeling that, you're like, I couldn't have that life. Yeah, you did. And that is, you probably sort boomers out quite nicely. Here's the other interesting thing about baby boomers, like 1 bathroom, possibly no lock on it. No privacy. You are not an individual. You don't get to have your own expression of things. You don't like to eat that? Not my problem. You don't think you're coming in right now? Well, I think you are. You don't decide. You don't pick the TV channel. You don't get to make a lot of decisions. And so this is an individual with a very collective mind. You know what I mean? They think about the group. And they gotta mind themselves. They gotta mind the authorities around them. Boomers know how their dad, like they know what shape their dad is in by the way he pulls into the yard. You know what I mean? They know when to make themselves scarce. They had a corporal punishment experience at home. They had a corporal punishment experience at school, and hell, the neighbors could give them a swat if they needed to as well. It was fine. They did not have any adults to hide behind. And I'm saying that very thoughtfully here. They were not advocated for in the way that subsequent generations have been advocated for. Boomers are actually really terrible negotiators. Because they didn't get to negotiate for themselves. Right? They had to mind. Now, you take that person and give them a bunch of these new entrants to the marketplace in a wage negotiation, like good luck, boomers, you're shot out of the water before you started. But I'll talk about them next. Anyway, so here's this kid, they grow up, they have like, there's some good stuff in this life. They're a very creative generation as a result. They go outside and they have to make their own fun. They know how to get started on their own. Right? They don't have to be handheld into every little damn thing. They know how to, they're just chucked outside, the door is closed. I don't know what we're gonna do, let's figure it out. So let's create something. They know how to create community, and they know how to get out of each other's way. They have a good sixth sense about what's going on in the world around them, because they've lived in close quarters with lots of other people and no place to retreat. They don't know what it is to get for themselves, because they never did. And so they're also an incredibly competitive generation. And so my dad's one of 10. And he will say to you, like, he laughs about it now, and it's shocking to me. He's like, no, there wasn't always enough food. It was kind of a tactic of my parents, like, you get home on time, because who knows? Who knows that? And in their family, that 8, like of the 10, 8 boys, 2 girls, right? And he was like, I think he's like the 7th of the bunch. It's like, no, Kristen, like, seriously, you hustled home. You got your chores done, you got in that house. Because if his elder brother sat at that table first, who knows how it goes for you, kid? Only one chicken gets killed that day. You know what I mean? And also they did have to kill their chicken that day. They have a real strong sense of where their food comes from, right? There's no distance between them and the realities of this life, right? This life. They're mechanically inclined. You know, they understand how to create food. They understand how to run a home. They had to do all those things as members of their household. When they went into post-secondary, they were generally the first in their family tree to get post-secondary education, and it really did distinguish them from the pack. And they knew that, right? They were eligible for more employment. They had better prospects as a result of that, and they have valued education very highly for their children as well. And when they moved into the corporate space, it was still in the 60-year model. So they had good prospects of moving upward, and they did. As they moved up that ladder and got increasingly responsible roles and opportunities and got stabilized in workplaces, they had a really strong foundation economically. After World War II, there was about a 50-year span of unprecedented economic growth. Again, the best span of growth that we've seen in recorded history. And that was the time that boomers were getting on their feet and getting up the ladder, if you will. So they had a really good foundation. That is not to say that they had it easy. Right? They still paid remarkable interest rates for things, right? Getting a house was tough because the interest rates are really high, blah, 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 blah. In Alberta, you would have had some boom and bust in the economy, but generally the trend line went in a good direction. As they've stayed in the world of work, what's been kind of difficult for them is they're a naturally competitive generation. You know, anytime you have a big population with scarce resources, there's just a natural competitive vibe to it. When they have been in the world of work, they are ambitious. They wanted to move upward. They were gratified by the recognition of that. And that's important. And they really value time-based incentives. Does that make good sense? Does that sound like any boomers you know? Good. The next generation I'll talk about is that baby bust. They're also called Generation X. My generation, the waste, and I mean that in all of the ways, like in the waste. This is a really wacky generation. First off, it's a small generation, so we've had the advantage of not having to compete a bunch for work, right? There's not very many of us, and so when we step into the footprints left behind by the baby boomers, we are a smaller generation filling that same infrastructure. So we were able to find work relatively well. However, you can imagine when the economy collapsed in 1987, I was just entering the labor market. And the economy collapsed. Remember Black Monday, way back in the day, this is the stock market collapsed, everything went to hell in a handbasket. Coming out of that, what they realized is that organizations had gotten very bloated in the senior leadership space with all of these baby boomers, and they needed to do some downsizing, right sizing, this kind of thing. My generation was just getting into the ladder, and the ladder started to collapse. Typically, baby boomers were the safest of the bunch because they had the most experience, they had good education, and they had been in the system for a long time. We had a hard time breaking in. That's not to say there wasn't work for us to do, but it wasn't in that permanent, full-time pensionable work. It was more in that contract, temporary, contingent workforce. And that's where we tended to flourish then. We're like, okay, you won't hire me, but you'll contract me. Okay, I better get a couple of contracts though, because this one will end. So I've got a contract with you now. Okay, good. And I have a side hustle with you. I've got this and I've got this and I've got this. You'll find with this generation, they tend to have multiple income streams. And it's not that they are flitting or you know what I mean, that they're not serious about work. I think they're just not very confident that work won't let them down. And I think they're actually probably right in that perspective. Ever since 1987 and then the downsizing of the 1990s that followed, we have never seen that full-time pensionable stable work kind of continue the way it had before that. So we're probably good. We're probably good making the choice we've made, but we look very much uncommitted, right? I think there's a lot of question about whether we're really in it to win it. And we are, but we just don't know that we're going to retire with you. I think it's probably a good bet to prepare not to. We went and got lots and lots of post-secondary education, all the education in the world. Still, we were working as bartenders when the marketplace collapsed a bit until we could get our footing and get going again. When we hit the housing market, boomers had kind of already come before us and pressed up those prices and then pressed down the volume of available pensionable work. So all of a sudden we didn't have a good bet to get housing. It wasn't an easy time. So we lived in our parents' basements probably longer than we needed to. And everything else that kind of shifted on us was really a critical and, kind of impact on how we showed up. This is the generation that moved from imperial to metric. This is the generation that moved from analog to digital. This is the generation that moved from stable nuclear families to a new family model of blended and non-conventional families. We were that first generation that was really mostly products of divorce. Mostly, like more than half. We really normalized having 2 Christmases. It was fantastic. But we moved away from our rural roads. Like obviously when those families fell apart, they didn't stay together. And so all of a sudden you start to see generally mom is custodial and moves to a community where she can find work, because chances are the farm that she's living on right now isn't the right place to look for it. And so off she goes. And so these are kids that are typically raised maybe a little bit at a distance from their extended families, rather than previous generations were generally raised fairly close to their extended families, at least for the 3 generations in Canada that had been kind of colonial immigrants. So they're an interesting bunch that way. We are probably not the most optimistic group you'll ever see. We're pretty realistic, and we don't expect it goes really good for us. But we're hardworking, smart, all of the good things, and we tend to kind of roll with the punches. Right, we were talking at break about moving around a lot. Like you just become a generation that kind of rolls with it. Like, sure, whatever. You want to do that? Sure. You want me to be a vice president? Sure. You want me to be a male guy? Sure. Like, whatever. Doesn't matter. Our egos aren't necessarily caught up in that same way that maybe previous generations would have been, because we don't believe that it's very sticky. The problem with us is we do have a side hustle. And so what I do notice is the difference between this generation and baby boomers is that baby boomers will talk about quitting and not do it. My generation will not talk about quitting, but will do it. Right? We generally have already buffered ourselves from economic disruption. And so what keeps us at work isn't the paycheck. Right? We can generate revenue somewhere else. And I've sure noticed that that's been an interesting trend as I work with employers all over Canada. This is a generation that when they decide to leave, they don't raise the flags a bunch of times. They just go. And I think because boomers tend to give notice a lot and maybe not move on it, employers have fallen into that sense of security, like, well, if you're at risk, you'll mention it to me. If you're a flight risk, you'll tell me, and then I can do something for you. And I think with boomers, that might still be accurate, with the subsequent generations less so. They'll just go. Hell, some of them don't, yeah, you know what I mean? All right, this group, the Echo, so these are the 1980 to 1995. So if you're born in 1980, how old are you now?
43.
Yes, they're not children. They're not new entrants anymore. They're middle-aged. We have to stop talking about millennials like they're all under the age of 30. They're not. The very, very youngest of them is just barely under 30. And so let's be clear. This is a mature, capable generation that we can look at and talk about in terms of their labor market participation, because they have a lot of it. Now, these are children of baby boom. Now, I want you to imagine this. You're a baby boomer. You grow up sharing a room your entire life. And here's a boomer story that I love. A friend of mine is an educator, baby boomer. And I said, so like in your school, in his school, they have no peanuts, right? There's so many peanut allergies. There are no peanuts allowed in their school. They have a peanut-free school. And I looked at him, I'm like, I can't imagine such a thing. Like, we all lived on peanut butter when I was a kid. And I said, how weird. And he goes, oh, Kristen, he goes, I have like a deadly peanut allergy. And I'm like, you do? How did you live? And he said, let me tell you a story about my dad. This is where the trauma counselors have to come in. So his parents used to throw great parties. I'm sure your parents did too, after the ball tournament parties. And his dad would get just a little bit drunk and then call a kid into the room to bring the peanut butter. And his dad would paint peanut butter on his ears because his ears would just blow up like Dumbo. And then he'd get him to kind of have a little.
That's horrible.
And I'm like, that happened to you, hey? He's like, I learned to get out of peanut butter's way. Peanut butter didn't get out of my way. I learned to get out of peanut butter's way. Now that guy went on to become a parent. Now you can imagine who advocates for their kids.
Right.
Nobody is messing with his children. He suffered and remember back when you were a boomer, they used humiliation-based tactics for classroom management. Humiliating a child, shaming a child was on side. Hitting a child in front of their peers, on side. Hitting all of the kids to punish one, on side. We did some stuff to boomers that now created an army of very interesting parents. Because now you give them their designer babies. Now, the other thing about boomers is they're post-birth control pill moms. They decide when they're having their children and how many they're having. They space them out perfectly so they can give them the perfect amount of attention. Then they have the next one exactly when they want to have it. Then they have their $1 million family. And they design that kid's path through life, and they're going to fulfill that kid's childhood needs like nobody's ever done it. And it's a competition game because there's a lot of other boomer moms doing the same thing, and I will out-survive. I am shocked when I go to, I don't have any children, so I'm so allowed to say whatever I want. Going to baby showers with my peer group and older, so most of my cousins are a bit older than me, going to their baby showers. Remember one lady gave like some kind of a mobile or something like this, and the other one went, the right colors for baby development are black and white. It's like, no, the words here are thank you. Thank you for this lovely gift. No. Oh no. There's a hierarchy of the gifts. How well are you developing your baby? Did you get the right colors? Did you read the right books? Have you gone to the right lessons? They should have taken those lessons by now. Developmentally, you're falling behind. This is how we parent now. If you have 10 kids, you're counting them multiple times, you never get all their names right. That's how it should be. Like, you're lucky at the end of the day, like, oh, they're all in, good. Right? Like, kids are sleeping in drawers. That's fine, that's normal. You get designer child bearing, all of a sudden what you get is an interesting pressure on the parents to do right by those kids and no boundaries on what that should look like. That kid then goes into the post-secondary or goes into the K-12 system. It's a little fraught with peril, isn't it? There's a boomer who got strapped their kid's not gonna get strapped. And that teacher better wash their ass. Cause that boomer mom knows where they live, right? We know that there's a far more mama bear kind of vibe on how we send kids into the public school system. We also know that when they go into the world of work, unfortunately, the same thing comes with. I taught in a college, I taught at Red Deer College, and I taught at the U of A. And I remember having to look at a set of parents. I'm not gonna put this on moms only, because this is a full-on parenting, this is like full parenting court press. And saying to them, I am not telling you your child's grades. Child is a 24-year-old adult, pays taxes. I'm not telling you the grades. And they're like, we insist. Who do you think's paying your wages here? I'm like, it's an adult child. I am not telling you, like, this child has Protection of Privacy Act working, there's policy here. And like, doesn't supersede my parenting. This is a fascinating thing. I'm watching parents of a 24-year-old demand the ability to influence their academic path. But there's a boomer in this room probably right now, somebody going, I'd want those grades, right? Now, God forbid you put him in hockey, because then it's on the coaches, have you done right by my kid? And I coached in youth sports for 8 years. It was fascinating because there is a desire that that kid gets a good shot. And sometimes it isn't fair for all. And there's far more parent advocacy modeled for this child to say, are you getting what you deserve here? Are you getting what you deserve? And as that kid rolls into the world of work, why would they not have that mindset? I get a 12-year window. Am I getting what I deserve? And God love them. They're negotiating with baby boomers who are terrible self-advocates. The kid goes in the door going, I would like to be a director. And the boomer goes, okay, I guess you can have that corner office. And the kid's like, I'm 28. Here I go. I'm going to make president before I'm 35. There is a thing happening right now where because they want it, they're getting it. They're asking and they're getting it. Because we also haven't figured out in the world of work how to make that adjustment to that 12-year mindset model that says, what must you produce and be able to do to sit in that job? We like to think in terms of time. You put 20 years in, you get to sit in that job. Which is why sometimes we don't have really highly effective managers because we haven't specified the job properly. But all of a sudden, we see people being vaulted into positions they're actually not terribly well prepared for. They don't have the role and accountability skills for it. We haven't specified them because we've been leaning on the time horizon or the ladder to help us out there. Doesn't work well with this generation at all. Other things about them is they're more highly educated than any generation in recorded history ever. And that's going to be said about every generation that happens from this point forward, right? They're all going to be more educated than the last, which means they're more educated than their boomer counterparts, which means we sit there and go, well, it's got a master's degree. I guess it can lead. Please don't make that assumption. 24-year-old with a master's degree is the hardest thing in the world to employ meaningfully. Right? And I have them all over the place. The parents are like, well, we're just going to keep him in school until he has a master's, and we're going to get him his undergrad degree and then an MBA, and then we'll set him loose upon the earth and he can become awesome. Except nobody can employ a master's degree at 24 in anything meaningful because they've never done anything. There has to be that balance of field level experience as well as education. Experience without education is no good. Education without experience is no good. Right? And we're losing that balanced mindset because they're so technologically capable and they can chat GPT their way through a lot of stuff. That we haven't always been able to discern, are they bringing value that this organization needs? We got to think that way, and that way we can communicate clear expectations to them and give them a fair shot at being awesome. Does that resonate? Okay. Here's the other thing too, is the way that they learn. We have to talk about this. Boomers learned largely through memorization and recitation. Most boomers can still tell me a piece of poetry that they learned in elementary school, right? They've got stuff grilled in there so hard they can't get rid of it. This generation has not learned that way for two reasons. First off, the volume of information they have to manage is too big for memorization. It's just not an appropriate strategy. Second, the level of complexity and the level of uncertainty in the decisions we're making right now are such that the history is no good guideline for the future. And so they have to be able to kind of navigate that without those memorized facts and approaches. So what we have to do is recognize that they do both trial and error and catch and release. Trial and error, we tend to see in the technology zone. They don't read the manual first, they just start clicking. It works or it blows up. I don't know, it doesn't. The second is the catch and release, is where they reach out for information when they need it and only when they need it, and they don't retain it. Then they let it go, they let it float away from them. This is really good with certain SOPs, like if you've got an organization that needs standard operating procedures that don't have to be done daily, but they'd have to reference. That's why you start to see so much more digital kind of infrastructure and organization, so I can access those SOPs when I need them, and then let them go when I don't. And nobody's gonna read the manual. And those of us who have been loving the manuals know that we've never read them either, and it's fine. But it challenges employers to really ask, what information is truly critical for you to know? Like deeply critical, you have to memorize this, and the rest of this you can play catch and release. Because what we tend to do is say, here's the manual, memorize it. And that's not real either. We've got to get really organized as employers to know what is the role and responsibility you have and what are the objectives you need to create. So we're not just managing time in chair, but rather production of value for the organization. And on a learning front, what must somebody learn to be successful here? What are the things they have to commit to and never get wrong? And what are the things that are pretty adjustable? If we can get that level of clarity, we'll do a much better job positioning this generation for success. The other thing too is boomers do not have boomers' brains are a little bit full up, right? They've been learning now for 50+ years. And they're looking at you going, no, seriously, I'm not going to be able to memorize all of the things now. Being judicious about that is good for all generations, not just the incoming generation, maybe that's encountering systems like this for the first time, but the generations prior to that have had to encounter many systems like this. So give them a shot at being successful. All right. This last generation, Generation Z, so they're born after 1995, quite young, right? They're just kind of graduating from high school. We're just starting to see the front end of them. But they do have some unique and interesting characteristics already that I think are really worth talking about. One of the things that I really like to imagine about them is that all of the diversity we've only been talking about, they've been living. They live in the most diverse community that has ever been lived in. They see the most diverse TV, they see the most diversity in every form you can imagine. And they have got us figured there. And whatever they're doing, however bonkers it might feel to us, is probably the right thing to do, and just do it with them. What are we arguing about? We don't even know what we're talking about. Right? I was raised in a family that used to use all sorts of feminine characteristics to degrade each other. Like I'd watch all my uncles go, well, Jesus Christ, you just throw like a girl. Oh, stop whining like a woman. Like I heard that around me 24/7, and that was a normal experience. This is a generation that goes, you don't talk like that. Don't back them off. Go with them. Let them lead us here. We don't know what we're talking about in this space. They're better at this than us. Just follow. Like there are times to acknowledge that the communities in which we were raised left us with all sorts of things that are not well suited to the communities we're going to be living in the future. And they're better produced for that, 100%. One of the other things about them too is they take social responsibility very, very seriously. Very seriously. Not the way other generations did. In my grandmother's generation, social responsibility was volunteering. You had Meals on Wheels. You know what I mean? You got out there and you did for your neighbors. That was small town kind of mindset on social responsibility. This generation has big city mindset on social responsibility. So they don't want to work for companies whose environmental footprint is evil. And they're just not doing it. They're just saying no to them. They have a whole website that they all go to check in on who's evil. Once they're evil, they just don't go to work there. They shrug and smile and go, that's okay. There's lots of places to work that aren't evil. That's an interesting way of thinking, isn't it? The last campaign that I did for an organization who was hiring like a senior manager, so we were hoping for somebody, let's say in their middle thirties kind of thing, who had post-secondary education and had at least 10, 12 years experience, so 35, let's say, and up. All of the generation that we saw between 35 and kind of 40 came in and said to us, I'm going to need to see your scorecard in terms of gender equity. I said, I'm sorry, what? I would like to see what your gender pay gap is. I'd like to see how many women are in your board of directors, how many women are in your senior leadership group, and the quantity of women that you've onboarded from diverse communities, underrepresented communities, marginalized communities. And I'm like, well, of course you would. Okay. So out of the 4 finalists in this position, 3 of them made that request. This is not a one-off, this isn't a chance. They're looking around and going, aren't we past this? Are we still talking gender wage gap? Well, I'm not going to. I'm only going to work for companies that have solved for that. And I think there's a good chunk of companies going, oh, we haven't solved for that yet. We're getting to that. And this generation is going, I'll just work for somebody who's already gotten to it. Thank you. They're absolutely voting with their employment. And they're going to be an interesting bunch to wrestle with because there's jobs they're not taking. And those employers are walking around saying nobody wants to work. And the actual truth of it is nobody wants to work for them. Let's have it.
I don't know.
Okay.
I get that. Anybody that I've employed at this age, they don't know how to work.
Okay. All right, that'll be a different thing. We'll talk about that too. We'll talk about that too. Hold on to that thought. We'll go there. One of the things that's kind of interesting about them, crowdsourced, cloud-based, like they're not kind of an on-premise, hands-on kind of thinker either. They don't take the TV channels we offer them. They make their own content and they produce and broadcast it. They're 6 years old with a blog. Like they're out there producing content. They're the star of their own show. And that's an interesting thing to employ when you think about how we ask them to think collectively when all we've done is kind of steward them in a more individualistic way. The other thing about them that's a bit frustrating is, and I just want you to put yourself in this kid's head for a minute. COVID, so the air is going to kill you and you can't leave your house. 9/11, terrorists are going to come and it doesn't matter what building you're in, you're not quite safe. Innumerable mass shootings. Go to the mall, go to the club, go to the fair, go to school, probably not safe. Your food could be killing you. The water's probably killing you. The earth is now contaminated. The earth's on fire. It's really, really hard to really care about how to correctly bag some fries when you actually don't know that you have a viable future. And I want you to think about that. I'm not saying that captures your whole experience here, but I do want you to think about this. This is a generation of kids who have been raised in a 24/7 news cycle, so constantly bombarded. And now the 24/7 news cycle isn't a public good, it's a private good, which means it's a competitive space, right? All of these organizations are competing for your viewership. How do they compete? By sensationalizing every story to the maximum they can without actually losing the story. So they're distorting it as far as they can. And that's what we call news now. And this kid has it pushed at them 24/7 from multiple sources. Now we're going to add in the algorithm to this. The algorithm is kind of an interesting dilemma too, because it takes whatever fears we have about the world and amplifies and distorts them. So y'all know how the algorithm works. I go onto the Facebook and I think I have said, let's say Christy and I are chatting and I say, geez, you know what? My ears are really ringing. Are yours? Can you hear that? And she goes, no, I can't hear that. And I go, oh, awesome. Then I open up my Facebook and it says, are your ears ringing? And I go, holy crap, they are. So I click that thing and it says, probably it's a desperate illness. And I go, oh my gosh. And I click that thing. And then it's got a whole bunch of different things about that desperate illness, which I totally don't have because there actually was a buzz in the room and I could hear it. It doesn't matter because by now, pretty sure I'm dying. And so I'm clicking that thing. And then I get bombarded from every social media source ever because they all talk to each other. And all of them are coming back going, You know what that buzzing in your ear is? It's the government. Right? And birds aren't real, they're drones, and then we roll into a world where I am experiencing what I believe to be the world being presented back to me in a way that is distorted as an amplified reflection of my fears. Is that, you know what I'm talking about, right? So, now as a baby boomer, my mom is not navigating that way. My mom is calling me up and saying, Kristen, do you know what they're doing now at the grocery stores? I go, what's that, Mom? She said, they park their van with the sliding door next to your driver's side door. So if there's a van backed in by your car, you don't go to your car. You go to that store and you get somebody to help you. And I go, what are they gonna do much? Was that sliding door, as soon as you unlock your door, they get you. You got your keys in your hand, they take your car. Nobody knows that you just got shoved in the van, and then they put a driver in your car and off you go. I lived in Camrose. There's no murder vans showing up at the grocery stores in Camrose. We'd hear about it, it's Camrose. But my mom's got it coming at her from 17 different news sources, and if she's clicked on it once, now it's coming from 50. And she believes this is prevalent, that people are being nabbed at the grocery stores all the time. And I go, Mom, well, where's the news coverage on that? And you know what she said to me? She goes, yeah, they don't want to cover that. Now, my mom is a judicious, thoughtful, smart human who gets caught in the algorithm. If you think that a generation of kids who've been raised in it can distinguish real from fake, I don't know how. So we have to be mindful of what we're creating, the table that we're setting for this group, right? What's the table that we're setting for this group? Now, let's talk about how they interact with your work, given all of that. There's a whole transition happening here away from the world we used to live in, right? Which was a very, very structured place where I knew how things were going to be. I knew how I was going to move through it. I knew how I could advance. I knew what was expected of me. You knew what was expected of me. And we could figure ourselves out pretty good there. The parents wanted me to get the hell out of the house and go to work and do the things so that I could become a reasonable adult citizen. And all of that structure and shared expectation has given way to a far more organic and kind of responsive place, where every single day we're asking ourselves, what do you need from me? How do I show up for you? Can I do that? Can I not do that? The other thing too is that prescribed hierarchies, that top-down ladder mindset, kind of gives way to more organic kind of who's the expert in the space. It might not be the person with the most tenure. It might not be the oldest person in the room, but who actually knows how to do this best? And how do we position them to do their thing? So for example, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, when it comes to technology, if I'm still looking at the person who's been in the org chart the longest to expect them to have the most expertise there, it's not going to work. I have to position people with authorities where they also have expertise. And that's no longer in the ladder format that it used to be. Moving away from the command and control space to the servant leadership space. As a young worker comes into the marketplace, they're saying, what will you do for me lately? And then we've got to have a conversation about what's reasonable. What can we expect? What can we actually offer and live with? And what's sustainable both for us and for them. Moving away from the ladder to that organic model, they might not stay for 60 years. They might only stay for 5. And all of a sudden we look at different labor markets, right? Maybe you want to hire people who are in their late 50s because ultimately the chances are you'll keep them longer. And that's not a bad bet. And then finally, moving away from the idea to like, do you fit in here? To that idea about, do you add something we don't have here? That we're better prepared for the world. So if you were to use those ideas to inform your hiring practices, what would change next? I'm just going to roll to the next slide. So now let's go to your point. Tell me it.
I find they don't.
And how does that show up? Like, what does that actually look like in practice?
Oh, they don't, they have no self-start. You have to tell them what to do every step of the way.
Yeah.
They don't do anything better than themselves. They just sit there and expect you, I don't know what to do it, I guess. The paycheck, yeah, that's it, that's the else. And they think they should get paid to do nothing. They don't understand that you don't get paid for just sitting there.
So you gotta hustle.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you're first bringing them on board, how are you communicating that?
I have a policy book that I give them, and they have to read it, and then they sign it.
Okay.
So they know what they're supposed to do, but that even still doesn't mean they're gonna do it,
Is there anything in that policy book that you don't actually expect them to do?
and I don't.
How big is, tell me about the policy book.
Oh, it just gives, what they're expected to wear, what they're expected to do during the day, phone calls, you know, that.
Yeah. Okay, good, all right, others having a similar experience?
Sounds like a work ethic issue, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like the work ethic wasn't there, like, we have older staff that like, they're in their sixties and they're breaking their backs, we're young guys that are watching.
Yeah, that's the.
You know, I'm not finally wrong, but I think it's more of a mindset. Like, they didn't grow up on farms, they didn't grow up having to pick rocks, you know, they don't have a hard day in their life. Yeah.
I have sons, so I've actually never hired that young. My sons are 19. And it drives me nuts how often they quit their job. And I would love to have the job that they're given. I would love to make the money that they're getting. And those are my own family. They're so entitled to this frustrating.
I noticed between having staff and also with raising kids, one of the big things, like I had some of the same issues with staff as well. But what I'm finding is that when you look at how these kids are raised, in most cases now, they come from parents who won't allow their child to do work that's gonna break their back. So they've grown up their whole life with the parent doing the hard work. And then they go to a job and they're perfectly fine with watching somebody else work hard because that's the environment that they've had their whole life.
And they can't. So whereas when I was young, I could start working at 12. I find that kids now think they won't even consider you until you're 18. So they can't even develop that. They won't.
Oh, no,
stand
their
a
job
chance.
is being a kid. Right, they can't just go to
I
school.
mean, even if you have that mature
Yeah.
child that wants to make them responsible, no one will hire them.
Yeah.
And you know, the previous generation, to get a job at whatever age they wanted, they said, sure, if you're willing to work, you know, we'll give you some cash.
You can hustle,
You can hustle, you can work on a farm and throw bales.
Yeah.
Now.
you go
kind of-
pick bottles.
That's right.
How many of you picked bottles at one point or another in your life? I remember going to my parents' ball tournament, with big bags for bottles. And I that was like windfall days, but I was out there hustling, right? This is not a generation that has had to do that for money. Yeah. Now, here's the other thing too, is as a boomer kid, if you're a boomer kid, there's 6 mouths to feed one income. If you're a millennial or later, there's 3.5 mouths to feed on 2 incomes. Money isn't the motivator. Like when you say they're here for the paycheck, yeah, like they do want to have some money for sure of their own that they don't have to, you know, that they get to have autonomy over. But the truth is, economically, they're better off than any generation we've ever produced. They didn't have to buy their car for themselves. Chances are their parents bought their car. Oh my gosh, and like teaching was shocking to me how many parents buy condos for their kids to live in while they go to university. And I remember just going, no, you live in a flea-infested hellhole like the rest of us live. Right? Because it makes you hungry, but like they're not, like, if they have a different set of conditions. The other thing too is boomers, like what did you have? 3 channels growing up? What did you have to compare to? Everybody in your town probably had pretty much the same look and feel as you did. Maybe you're a little bit poorer, maybe you're a little bit richer, but for the most part, we were in a healthy middle class band. I remember like friends of mine getting really excited when they get like a plastic wrapped sweet in their lunch, like a Twinkie. Like that. Oh, Mom, can't we have Twinkies on our lunch? And Mom would be like, no, they're too expensive. That was the coveted thing, or oh, brand name jeans. That was a big deal. This generation compares themselves to the Kardashians. Like Kylie Jenner was a billionaire by age 19. She has her own jet. I'm not, like, what am I, like getting my own car, a 72 Honda Civic, just doesn't compare anymore, does it? Right, so the motivator isn't what it used to be. eking ahead $1 at a time just doesn't fit that, doesn't bridge that gap. And so, to your point, that household doesn't, it doesn't,
Different too, in the aspect that like the kids are all driving now. Because they can't save money, so they can't get jobs. You turn 16 and they buy your own vehicle, now all your insurance has to be paid up front, you can't do monthly payments. So there's almost no
disincentive, just
so parents pay it because they have to, essentially, either that or you're waiting until you're in your early 20s to buy your own vehicle, and who wants to do that?
Yeah.
And then boom, the expectancy from day one that my parents will pay it and I'll pay it.
Yeah.
My parents will pay it. Because
yes.
they don't want-
So can I make a
Yep.
couple of comments?
Yes, please.
If folks can hear me?
Yes, we can.
You know, I'm a really positive person, and you know, I boomed a long time. I was born in 55. And love young people, love kids, like to see their success. On the other hand, I think we're creating a safety net society. I think we're creating a crisis. It's not for me, and I know I'm just one person and one opinion. It isn't an interesting quirk that we've created at the end of the day, that these people like this stuff or are this way. I think society is at a breaking point where our current mechanisms, economy being one of them, is at risk. And I don't mean to sound pessimistic, because I'm not, but that's how I feel about this particular situation. I think that people, not everyone, of course, but there's a good percentage of youth, I guess that's the best way to describe it, that simply don't want to work and have no predisposition to finding a job. And the big challenge for our communities and rural communities across the province and across the country is finding meaningful opportunities to engage these people. And it's, you know, right from small business to other things in town, or we're gonna, I mean, it's just an epidemic to a certain degree. And I don't.
I'd like to, you know, kind of pick up one of the concepts that you're talking about. From a social perspective, one of the things that I see as a consistent thread is a very blame-based approach to society and economy. Right? Like I blame the teachers, I blame the coaches, I blame the employers, I blame the educators for the experience that my kid is having, which doesn't necessarily position accountability on the kid to create a better path for themselves, right? So I agree with you. I think that there's a pattern at play here, and you can't blame the kids, because blamed, by the way, doesn't get us out of blame. For one, it doesn't create accountability. They didn't do this. Like, they did not do anything. They were children who inherited a system that was trending in a particular direction, and now they're inhabiting that system and optimizing it, I'll tell you that. But you can't blame the youngest entrants into the system for the way that the system is. We've all had a hand in this, and the question is, where do we start to define what a better path forward is to go? And we got to look inside for that, right? Like, that is not, you know, I've had lots and lots of employers going, can you come and fix the kids? No. Wouldn't that work great? If I looked at this and said, stop exploiting the system for exactly what it is. Because if I don't get a driver's license and my employer sends a car for me, there is no incentive. That was, by the way, that was Fort Mac in 2007. Right?
Mhm.
Right. I had
And it's always blown my mind, like, if hearing kids that just don't want to work, how do they live?
okay. Don't work. Let's see
Where
how
do they
that goes for you.
Then
Right?
It's the parents' problem, it's
Yeah.
not the kids' problem, because, and like you said, it's also based on some of the employers that are creating these enabling mechanisms to prevent these young people from the opportunity of moving forward.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they're doing is if you're a parent who's providing your child your 18-year-old plus child, you know, that's no longer in school, a place to live, that's one thing. You can provide them a place to live and something to eat if that's your choice. But a lot of the times they're also providing all of the amenities and all of the benefits that come with being an adult. And having space and having a vehicle and having access to go party and socialize and all of these things that are not requirements of life. They're not, they are requirements of a good life, but they're not the necessities to live. Those are the things that they're gonna want to strive for. And if you take away every opportunity for them to strive for that, then they're never gonna mature past that possibility. They'll be 60 years old, living at home off their pension.
And you do steal from them the delight in creating something for themselves,
Oh, it's tragic.
right? This is a thing, this is a real thing. So from an employer perspective, here's what, if let's say there's a standard distribution of young workers coming to the workforce, and I will say that I think that there's 20% of them that are magnificent, right? In it to win it, hustling, going, getting stuff done, but they might not do it the way other generations did, but they're doing it. Start their own businesses, they start their own foundations, they're changing the world in meaningful ways, right? You take a look at some of these, you know, these kids you see maybe in the news who decide, you know what, that's it, I'm fundraising to change that problem in my community, and they just, you know, 6 years old, they've raised $17 million, and you think, okay, I guess the future's gonna be fine, right? So let's just acknowledge that there are a ton of kids out there that are bloody wonderful, and they're crushing it, and they're leading the way for us. And then there's the middle majority that have probably were annoying no matter what generation they were from, because they're kicking the dirt a bit and they don't pick up their towels and they, you know, whatever, and they need to be brought along, right? They need to be brought along. I think that's the group you're talking about, where it's like, okay, they're gonna live 20 years longer than the earliest boomer did, so we got time to sort them out. If they extend that time in kind of just an extended childhood, that's probably a good choice, right? Be a kid a little longer, but it's coming for you, the adulthood. And then we start to create a system of support for them to get self-carriage and to have the gratification of self-carriage and the wonderfulness of that. I get it though. They don't have to start at 12 like maybe previous generations do. They get to start at 18, whatever. They'll have to get started, and they're the ones we got to take a look at. Really take a look at how do we create systems to enable that, and not blame-based systems, because nobody can learn in blame. Nobody can grow in blame. It's got to be kind of love, right? It's got to be kind of a loving system. And she goes, you're magnificent. You just haven't quite found it yet. And I'm going to help you get found. And then the back end kids are the kids that we've really failed, right? That we've really failed. And we've got to really examine how communities make sure that they still have a viable future and that there's room for them to turn it around. And that we are able to fit for them the solutions that are right and true and good for them, that we don't leave them to just languish in our communities, right? They're the ones that sometimes we hire and they, you know, they don't even show up for the second interview, or they accept the job and don't show up for the first day at work. Like that's a group that really kind of lost the plot and not thinking about the long-term consequences of these choices, and sometimes get into some real irreversible problems. We do have to create systems to support them to get right. But I'd say that middle majority, if we can be thoughtful about how we engage, off we go. Now, I want to address your issue on the policy stuff. And are you open to a different perspective on this? Okay. Ideally, organizations build policy to give us a how to do it right manual, not to prohibit doing it wrong. And that shift is really significant, right? Rather than saying, here's all the ways you should screw up, don't do those. It should say, this is what it is to succeed and thrive in this organization. And as a policy manual, then this is aspirational. This is like elevating you, the person. This helps you through those moments of uncertainty that you don't even know you're going to have yet, but trust it's all in the manual. So if you found that your policy manual is going to a place of what not to do, and they have to sign to get into it, you have to sign that they read it, I think we're missing an opportunity, because I don't feel any accountability to a policy manual. If I have accountability, it's to you, right? And if you invite me into accountability to this outcome, It has to have a couple of characteristics, right? It has to make some kind of sense. So if I look at you and go, you have to work every Thursday night no matter what. If I don't understand why on that, chances are I'm not going to be accountable to it. So the why counts, not just the what. The why counts. And a manual rarely does a great job of that. But if you take me, I'll tell you a terrible, do you all know this company called Centera?
Mhm.
It's a vertically integrated ag company. They have retail, production, farms, markets, like it's a massive greenhouse operations. Anyway, I worked for them for about 14 years, and the CEO is a friend of mine, and he, early in his career, he can't do it anymore because the company's so big, but he used to do this thing when there was a new hire to the organization. And he used to throw them in the truck and take them for a drive, which is a little intimidating for a new hire, right? Because he's kind of fancy. And so he'd shove them in the truck, and his family homesteaded. And that's how they started this business. And so he grabs the new hire and he takes them for a drive, and he goes to his grandparents' homestead, and he stops the truck and he goes, "This is my grandparents' homestead. And they laid all of the foundations for everything that you're gonna work in today." And then he drives them to the next farm that they purchased, and then he drives them to the first production facility, and then he drives them to the sausage plant, and then he drives them to the big greenhouse, and then he drives them to the big, now fancy, shiny office that they have. And he goes, "Can you imagine that movement from that first farmhouse, that very humble homestead, to this? And I am responsible for that legacy." And he looks at that kid, he goes, "So you're up," puts him in a brand, and he says, "You and I are gonna go volunteer in town together. You're now carrying the brand." Well, that kid's in. Like, that kid is in, or he's out. Either way, if he's out, fire him fast. If that doesn't get him attached to the purpose of this organization, the legacy that they've got to carry, well, good to know, you gave it a good shot. But you have to give it a good shot. You have to bring them into a relationship with you personally. And the legacy has to matter, and the brand has to matter, and the culture has to matter enough that you humble yourself to it and invite them into that. And say, what you do here matters so much. Every customer here, I want them to leave here feeling like they were treated at the highest level of awesomeness, because there's so little of that in the world. And I trust you with my business every time you talk to my customers. Like, I want you to put that positive pressure on them. And I want you to wrap them in it and tighten that little grip, that little hug, so they almost can't breathe. And if they decide to back out of that, they can go. I'm a hire slow, fire fast kind of girl. But I will never let them disconnect from the purpose of their work. It's not a task that they're doing. They're carrying my legacy and my brand. And I want them to feel that in their bones. So if handing them the manual and getting them signing off isn't getting you what you want, I invite you to try something different.
I do that. I get them to sign readings on the manual, and then I bring them in and explain what their job means. And no matter what area the brand is important. Everything adds to that single. So I do that, I just don't.
So I think,
Tighter.
Well, I want you to flip the process. The whole sign off on the manual, here's all the ways you can screw up, sign off that you won't do that. You've already shot yourself out of the water. Flip the process. So start with the love. Start with the big love. Yeah. Because if you start otherwise, if I come to you and say, here's the contract you're gonna sign, you compromise this contract, it's gonna be trouble. Now let's talk about how important you are here. You're done. You've killed your message already. You can't recover. Flip it.
Never really think of my policy book as being like what you're doing wrong. It's just,
expectation.
well, not even expectations, just like, don't wear smart shoes to work.
Don't.
Like,
That's a
it's just
don't.
like,
This is what you could do wrong.
yes. It's what
Don't.
it's what we responded to, but it's not.
Yeah. Don't bring your cell phone. Don't wear this. Don't do that. Don't talk to so-and-so. Don't don't forget to wash your hands. If it's a list of don'ts, it's not a policy manual.
How do you don't wear, ripped jeans work positively?
Okay, so why do you want them not to? What's important about what they wear? Yeah, so it's critical to us that our customers see us as skilled professionals in our space, and that they know that we're on our game because we present in such a tidy, organized, and coherent way. We all look the same, they can figure out who their help is, and then they walk in the door. Because we all look right. They know that we're coordinated and organized because of the way we look. Therefore, our look is this. Yeah.
It's all that.
Yeah, but if the first thing is therefore you cannot, right? I want you to go to what's important first. And then how after.
Or encourage, our staff are encouraged to wear, look professional at all times, including dress pants or something like that. Instead of don't, maybe?
Yeah. Go it always in terms of what you want, not what you don't want.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you know what? You don't need them to sign it to fire them. I mean this in the most delightful way. You can fire them for any reason you want. The signature doesn't mean a damn thing, does it?
I just wanna know that they read it. That's all I
You don't know that they read it by the signature,
They don't, yeah.
so don't do it.
That's true.
You can fire them whenever.
Well,
you
and I think our challenge, and that's the key, like really good for retention. But the challenge is if you do get that one that you gotta go, you gotta go. There's nobody in a lineup waiting.
No.
So that's the other challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this is the huge dilemma, right? Is you populate your organization with people you don't really want to work with. And then oddly enough, it's really hard to recruit the people you do. Yeah. Because they walk in and go, well, this is not what I want to join. Right? They come in as a customer and they're like, this place isn't where I'm gonna learn the stuff I'm gonna learn. So it's really a better idea to not hire than to hire what you know will go away from your vision. And that's a terrible truth, but it is real. Don't hire, you can't get it aligned with your vision, because otherwise you become what you've tolerated.
I know, I keep hearing this because I'm in certain coaching things. I tell you this part. Okay, you're telling me this. So I have four over 45 people working for me. I need somebody coming in, and there's nobody coming.
Yeah.
Put in for that, so what do? You have to hire what comes, you have no choice. Because there's nobody coming.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about this a little differently. Let's treat, I'm gonna use your business without knowing a thing about it, so please disregard everything I say if it doesn't work. Just toss it. So we all have inputs into our business, right? Labor is one of them, raw materials are one, technology is one, blah, 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 blah. And then you do whatever you do without labor to produce your output, or that input to produce your output. If you can't get another input, what do you do? If you're literally doing your strategic plan, your operational plan, and you go, wow, we really need this to produce our goods. So let's say it's beef and you're making burgers, I don't know. And you go, wow, I no longer have a source of beef. There is no beef to be found anywhere in my marketplace. You're not making burgers anymore. And at a certain point in your business, strategically, you have to go, if I am dependent on labor and I can't get labor, I have to either change the way I produce my product, so I'm less dependent on labor. Change the product so that it is less dependent on labor. You have to respond to the environment. No, I get that.
So you have to have.
Yeah, I get that. So I'm saying,
Change it.
if you have no substitute for that input, you have to face that reality too. Strategically, like we can't go, why can't I get the people I want? If there's no people, what do you do? And you have a lineup of customers still? Yeah, like you've got more demand than you can supply, given the labor that you've got.
Somewhat, yeah.
Like there's,
It goes with personality as well, right?
oh, totally. But the thing about labor that's kind of interesting is if it was one of your hard inputs, like we kind of consider labor like a soft input. Like we can pick amongst the choices, but the truth is it isn't a very soft input. It's actually a really hard input. if it were power that was, like if it was any other input that you couldn't get at a reasonable price, eventually you'd have to face that as an organization and go, well, crying out loud. So you get exactly what has to happen. Either you pump up the price or you get higher quality coming in, which is painful for every business owner, but a reality. Because I can't go and wave a magic wand over labor and say, show up the way we want to. That doesn't work either. So leaving you high centered isn't fair to say, well, you've got to grind away in this existing model, even though it doesn't work for you. You've got to change the model. If we can't change the world around the model, we're going to change the model. And I think that's the tough discussion, and an interesting one too, because what happens, it's the same as kind of when we, this is the Fort Mac story, the kid doesn't show up for work, and the company calls and says, where are you? Your shift started, where are you? And the kid's like, oh yeah, I slept in. They go, well, get in here right now. And the kid goes, well, I don't have a ride. And so the employer sends a car, and they pick the kid up at home and they drive him to work. And then they make him sign the policy saying from now on you'll show up for work, and guess what he does the next day?
Sleeps in.
He sleeps in, and they send the car again, and they say, hey, we told you. Like at a certain point, we can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different outcome. Like at a certain point, you've got to change everything that you have the control to change. And move into a different operating model that doesn't rely on the labor you can't find, and goes to the labor you can. And it sucks. It's a tough thing, but it's if it were a supplier of any other hard good, you can no longer get, you adjust, you go to a different.
We're all here for the same reason, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I feel that we all have similar pain points with the newer generation, whatever we want to call it. And I think that this topic is probably longer than a 2-hour talk. But if we did have to wrap it up soon, and when we're talking about exploring practical ways that employers can develop, increase workplace engagement, retain great people, I picked up better onboarding, and supplying purpose, even though our generation is like this because I told you to. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't need explanation. We just got told that's what you do, and that's it. Doesn't matter what you care what it is, right?
Yeah.
So my disconnect is because I told you, but they need to hear it because of this, and that. So we have to have a mind shift as well. But anyway, if you could summarize the newer generation, how we could do those things we have listed here.
Yeah, ready?
What else would you say?
Brace yourselves. All right, absolute clarity of role and accountability. We have to stop managing time and start managing productive output. So you got to know what they have to produce to keep your business viable, not how many hours they have to put in to keep your business viable. And you have to be able to define those accountabilities to them so clearly on the first day they arrive. Because we don't, by the way, we don't do this real well. You've got to figure out too, how much you can afford to invest in labor and be prepared to make those investments. What we typically do is we hire them and think we'll get around to our investments in them a year or two later, because we still have that 1960s mindset. A year or two later, they're gone, or else they're already underperforming, and that's gotten enculturated. So start to make your investments as quickly as possible. You have to connect every single worker in your onboarding process to the purpose of their work. They have to know why they make your business sustainable. If you don't have a compelling why attached to it, it's just a bloody list of tasks. And they're all equal, right? If I don't know any better, they're all equal to me. Do not assume that they have the foundational kind of appreciation for those tasks, because they may not have done any of them in the past. So if I'm looking at a kid and saying, if you're gonna back up this truck and trailer, I want you to do a full kind of pre-trip of the space around you. If they don't know what the negative consequences of that could be, why would they do that task well? I have to make sure they understand the critical why attached to every single one of their tasks, so they have some shot at doing this for quality. Because if they don't know it, then they're just imitating us, and that's not thoughtful. Get prepared to figure out all of the ways that you can get technology working to your advantage with this generation. So rather than print-based manuals, I tend to, if you can, create systems where they can access information when they need it, how they need it, enroll at the, in the moment. You'll have a way better shot at them applying the tools and resources you want them to apply when you want them to apply them. Hand over hand guidance and support for much, much longer than you would do any other generation. So when you onboard them, I'm like, you and I are together for 17 million years. I am in love with this process with you. We're going to be awesome together. Let's get started. And I am able to articulate then what it is they're missing and why it matters that they miss it, until they don't. And I like the resistance is futile attack plan. Like, I just stay, I'm like, I got all the time in the world for you. You're gonna be so awesome here. There's no room for error, right? You're gonna nail this before we move on to the next thing. What I find that we tend to do as busy business owners is put them in role and walk away. And they fail miserably, and then we're outraged. And then we walk away, and they fail again, and we're outraged, and then we walk away, because we have other things to do. I get that. However, if you wanna do, and if you wanna get them organized and going well, carve out as much time as you can to be hand over hand support. Think about how this kid's been parented. 2 parents, no time. More money than time. Lots and lots of parents shoving a kid onto a screen saying, occupy yourself while I do more important things. And what they figure out is that they're not important. I walk them into the world of work, I look at them and go, you and I are gonna hang out together. You're the most important thing I will do all day today. All day I'm with you. Your awesomeness, you have no choice but to embrace it. Trust they will get there for you fast, they want rid of you. But that level of attention, and I'll tell you a story about this kid named Alex Taddy. When I taught at Augustana, Alex came into my program from up north, and he lived in a small northern community, very charming, really smart, all of the things. Comes down south into kind of mainland Canada, if you will, because he's from the Northwest Territories. And he is going to have the time of his life. Alex has got a party every night. He is dating a different girl every day. He is glorious in university. He's living on his own. He's got lightning coming out of his fingertips. Comes into my first class. And I asked all my students, this is a first year class, I said, what about this class could help you have an awesome future? And he looks at me and he says, oh, Miss Cumming, you're such an optimist. He goes, I'm just here for the party. Let it roll. And I smiled because that's not my business. That's his future, not mine. I don't take him personally. And he just is horrible. He's paying other people to do his papers. We all know it. We can't bust him. It's driving me nuts. He barely shows up to class. When he does, he's desperately hungover. But this is his life, right? And he gets the grades he gets, and on we go. Year 2, he comes in. I say the exact same question. What is it about this class that can help you have the futures? And he looks at me again and goes, you are such a committed person. That's delightful. And he says, I don't know about you, but I'm having the time of my life and I'm gonna keep doing it, Miss Cumming. Have a great day. And he's charming and does nothing. He barely passes and it's horrible. Year 3, Alex walks in the door. He'd gone home for the summer and something happened to him. I don't know what it was. He was a kid coming from a First Nations community, and I think he started to understand the land claim disputes were happening all across Canada related to treaty stuff. And he walks into my class early, which has never happened, and he sits down. And when I went around the class and I said, what is it about this class that's going to help you in your life? And he goes, oh, this is going to pave the path and make a difference in my home community. And you can feel his gravity, like I'm like, uh-oh, Alex just showed up. Stays after class and he says to me, he goes, Miss Cumming, I don't know if you knew this, but I haven't been taking my academics very seriously. They color me shocked, Alex. And he says, and here's the problem. He goes, I'm in my 3rd year right now and I don't know how to write a paper. He goes, I don't know if you knew this, but I haven't really been writing very well. And I'm like, at all. We all know you have. Anyway, resistance is futile. I put my arms around him. I love this kid. This kid's going to be awesome. I just got to wait for the moment that he knows it too. I've sat for 2 years. I can just hold for another 5 minutes till he tells me what's going to happen. He says, will you help me? I want to be successful. And I said, yeah, I will. Are you kidding? I'm with you 100%. Now, the way the post-secondary system works, you can pretty much screw up the entire 2 first years. You can come on up. It's all good. And still transfer out. Okay, because your GPA is based on your last 2 years. So if he can pull it together in 3rd year and he can pull it together in 4th year, he can go on to school. So he decides that day, that week, that month, he's going to become a lawyer and he wants to work on land claims in his community in the Northwest Territories. Now, he had a hell of a time. That was a hard semester. He hadn't read any of the textbooks He was in third year. He needed to do a lot. And he did it. So he finished his school. He did not get a perfect GPA, but he had a good enough GPA that he could go on to law school. He has since graduated from law school, and he's a practicing lawyer in his community working federal land claims. Their point of readiness isn't the same as yours. It can't be, their kids, right? They don't care about your business. That's your profit. That's your care. But there's some reason that they're there, and you've got to find that out. You got to look at them and say, what is it about being here that will contribute to the life that you want to have? And then you wrap your arms around them in that kind of like Python hug that says, I will stick with you through all of these awkward steps to be awesome, because that's what you do for kids, right? That's what you do for young workers, no matter what. They're all awful until they're not. And we have to be the place that eventually commits to them and stops just shoving them on a screen, saying, I'll get to you later, and says, no, I'll get you right as soon as you're ready. All of us had somebody who invested in us that way. Somebody did.
So I'm just
Yeah.
noticing that it's already 20 to 2, noticing the time.
stop.
If you do need, yeah, if you need to slip away, no big deal. We are 10 minutes, 12 minutes over time. But I'm just
Wanna do
thinking
round
too,
table?
maybe do we want to do a quick round table introduction of who we are? Or if we want to kind of call it and chat with Kristen or kind of each other after the meeting, we can definitely
It's up to you.
call it now. Bring the meeting to a close. What, do you want to do a quick
I'd
round
skip
table?
the round table.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
okay.
yeah.
Okay, so that deviated a little bit from the discussion you and I were having, but the onboarding process has to be focused on finding out what it is about their experience with you that will contribute to the life that they want to have. They gotta have that. That matters. That should come out in interview, but if it doesn't, it's gotta come out. And then you can help them figure out how to create that awesomeness for themselves. Plus, the investment in them does have to be there. Looking at them and saying things like, you know, you do have to accommodate their life. So they might need to go to school, looking at them saying, you come back here in the summer, you're employed here. Or I'll give you a bit of a bursary when you go off to university, you can come back and you can take some of the work with us again. Finding out all of the ways you can make investments in them that bring them back to you in the way that works for them and you, I think is crucial. I do think too, making sure that you don't pop a tight little box around them saying, this is all I need you to be and do. There's no young person in this work world kind of lives well there. Looking at them saying, these are the things I need from you to have a viable, sustainable business that can pay you. That's non-negotiable. And what do you need? And if they say, I want to do competitions, let's say it's hair. Then they go, I want to do competitions. You're like, I am not that salon. But then the question is, what can you do? But I will link you up with somebody who does that. I'll support some time off for you to go and pursue with that. Whatever it might be. But you got to get them to tell you that stuff so you can link into it. It can't just be on your terms. This generation won't go there. I don't see why they
The
would.
generation, like the generation before this, when they go through constant knowledge of that. I don't know about the university experience, but the trades experience, because I even went to talk to an annual leave and found that they were not being taught what they should be.
Oh, right?
They are not reaching the level that we did.
Yeah.
When we came out.
Yeah. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very, very.
Appreciate it.
I think that's across a lot of industries and
Yeah.
a lot of trades.
Yeah.
Because that's across a lot of industries and a lot
Yeah.
of trades, because I just think trade
That's what he
experience.
told me. He said it's not his last that's complaining about it. They're sending them out, not doing what they're doing.
There's a real dilemma, and I work in I work in corporate training systems and learning systems a lot, and it's really freaking me out. Because what we're doing right now is getting into very compliance mindedness when it comes to training. So can we check the box that I taught it to you, not check the box that you learned it?
You learn it, yeah.
And so what we do in doing that, so if you want to think about workplace safety, if any of you are from oil and gas, you know this space really well, is that when you go onto an oil field site, an oil and gas site, they make you do safety training before you can go on the site, and they make you sign that you did it. And what that is just a shift of liability from the
Yeah.
site to you. And when I'm training people in an oil and gas or mining or ag space, and they say, well, they have to do this compliance training, the first thing that we know right now is we're not investing in a human. What we're doing is using the human as a bit of a shield from litigation, and the human knows it, and so do we, and we all pretend that it's delightful. But the human knows it, right? The human knows, I'm signing this, so the burden's no longer on you. Well, I know what that means in this dance. So what would happen if we moved the learning system, so it was more about what you learned and not about what I taught, because that's just a cover your ass way to go, right? I taught it, it's not my fault they didn't learn it. What the hell is that? Like, what world are we in that we think that's a really good way to approach apprenticeship? The whole model of apprenticeship is you work beside a master, right? Who gives you the time and space to learn. Not so that the master said, well, I was with them all day, so not my fault they didn't learn. That's not what apprenticeship was ever meant to be. What we're doing in the trades too, like in all of the trades. I taught them, not my fault they didn't learn it. Yes, it is your fault they didn't learn it, because teaching isn't what we want as an outcome there. Learning is what we want as an outcome. So if they come out of school and they actually don't have the tangible skills to work, then we've failed them. And especially if they got the certificate, that we've not actually created competence. What we've done is created compliance, and then we want enthusiastic engagement. The two don't equate, right? So I do think too, whether they come in with the right paperwork or not, you have to do a competence assessment before you hire anything new. Because we are telling people that they are competent when they are not. And I've sure seen that in the safety space, and it's terrifying. When they say, yeah, no, I've got my confined space. No, let me do an assessment of whether or not you actually have learned how to do confined space properly, because that's a life changer if you don't.
Well, they're causing harm to the students, because students are told, you're wonderful, you've learned everything I've taught you, you're great, you're gonna be great out there.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
They're not great.
they're not.
And that kind of feedback
Nobody
is
loses,
rare.
everybody gets a trophy.
Yes.
Thank you.
And actually, that's not just the younger people either, because I know the most blatant example I had of that, like I had tradespeople that had to do job tasks training or job testing basically to get hired. But at that time, when I was hiring office staff, I didn't have a task-based test as part of the criteria. And I had hired somebody who had just gone through a training program for an office administrator. They also had some business experience running with a store and so on for a number of years. She did 6 months in school, 6 months on the job training, and couldn't work an Excel sheet.
Yeah.
You know, she was out or do GST. Pardon me?
I said, oh my goodness.
Yeah, she was completely incompetent. Wonderful woman, like really, really great person. And ticked all the boxes as far as like pleasant in the workplace. But that training did not give her any usable skills in that.
I'm guilty. My employer makes me take aerial space and makes me take 1 million courses every 2 years.
Yeah.
In the industry. So on my resume, it looks really good.
Yeah.
But if I ever got a job anywhere else, I would never been in this situation, but I've taken it, you know, 10 times.
I watched this in the first aid space. So if you work in a place that has a first aid requirement, they have to repeat it, what is it, every 2 years. I had to audit a first aid course just last year. It was fascinating. See you later. Thank you so much for your comments. The first aid trainer literally gave out the correct answers the entire way, because so many of the people in the course were just doing it to keep their like so they can expire and they could still go on the job. Not one of them learned any first aid. She went, okay, so when you take a look at the multiple choice, you know what that one is. It's C. We just talked about that, and they're all just like, okay, C. They got no follow-up print material, nothing. So anything that they learned was talked to, like yelled at them over the course of the full day. She told them the correct answers on the entire test, and every one of them got certified at the end. Of course they did. There was one guy in there who had never taken first aid. New entrant to the labor market, right? So all the guys who are 50 and have actually taken first aid like 100 times are like, yeah, no problem. This is how it goes. Just check me off. This one new entrant, that was his experience of first aid. Is he going to be able to supply first aid on a work site? Absolutely not. But he was in that batch. And we got that whole compliance mindedness and we attached it to that young worker, and he had no business having that experience. And I mean, I like as a consultant, I lost my mind. I'm like, this is irresponsible practice. If you can't figure out how to keep first aid interesting, because I don't know the job, first aid is interesting. You get an experienced bunch of guys in a first aid class, let them tell you about the times they have had to apply first aid. It's gory and awesome. And it sure makes the day relevant in a hurry.
They still do that the first thing.
What do you mean? They still tell the gore stories?
No, they still go, this is what you need to remember on the test.
Yeah.
For the test.
Yeah, they just tell them the answers. You can't figure out why people aren't engaged and think that in first aid is important if it were important. So there's a bunch of like big, huge kind of systems level dilemmas. One of them is that the volume of information we expect people to plow through to be workplace prepared has grown and grown and grown, and we have not faced our trade-offs. So if you look at even just K-12 system, we keep adding, we don't take anything away. So everything becomes more superficial. And that's a problem. So we're trying to hustle through more volume with the same amount of time. And the human brain doesn't actually learn a whole bunch differently than it did 3 generations ago. We actually have to slow things right down and acknowledge that just exposure to a thing is not the same as learning about a thing. And if we can do really great work site safety programs where you really get thoughtful about what they have to do with high level of competence, and you focus deeply on that, and which things that can be done in a superficial way, and you focus less on those, then we have a chance of at least signaling to the employee that there's thoughtfulness about their time there. Because otherwise they just treat it all like it's superficial. Why wouldn't they? All of the things are the same. Everything's a 10 and nothing's a 10. So if you really distinguish the 10 out of 10s from the 2 out of 10s, then I think you've got a better shot.
And I think that's a great way to wrap up, actually, because we're almost hitting 2 o'clock. So I want to let everybody kind of continue on their day. But I really appreciate everybody being able to come out today. And I know Kristen's going to stick around too. So if you want to touch base with her, have some questions or that.
Contact information, if you've got to go.
Yeah.
You can certainly reach out to me if there's anything you want to ask about or talk about on your own time. You just let me know.
Yeah, but so yeah, she'll definitely stick around for a bit or follow up with her. She enjoys chatting about this kind of stuff. So thank you all again for attending today. Take a look at the back of your agendas. We've already scheduled a business support network meeting in November, on November 30th. And we're really excited about this one too. This one we're bringing in a speaker to talk about workforce, managing workforce burnout and fatigue risk management. So building resilient workers or employee resiliency. So I think that'll be really interesting. Scan the QR code to register, and then you're good to go. Lunch will be provided again, and spread the word on this one too. We can get out more people. That'd be wonderful. Otherwise, thanks again for attending today, and enjoy the rest of your day. And safe travels if you traveled from Fox Creek.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the presentation, Kristen. It was very well done.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you. It was a great presentation.
Awesome. I think Kristen could hear you too. Thank you.
Good. I have some strategies now to deal with younger people, except for getting them out of the basement.
Hard love, Brad. Hard love.
I guess that's it. Okay. Bye-bye. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, you bet. Bye-bye.